No treaty was ever written in clean ink. Wolves called it law, honor, balance. But Alara had learned that peace was often stitched from someone else's skin and tied tight with a name nobody bothered to speak gently. The strong called sacrifice noble when they did not have to kneel for it. The weak learned silence because protest only gave cruel men more words to twist. By the time the gates of Nightshade Fortress rose out of mountain fog, iron dark and torchlit against the evening storm, Alara understood the shape of her role with brutal clarity. She was not a guest. She was an offering. The chain on her wrists had rubbed her raw all the way up the pass. Each jolt of the wagon had driven metal into bone, and the brand at the side of her throat still burned where Cain Thornwood's steward had pressed the treaty sigil into her skin 2 nights ago. Her dress had once been gray wool. Now it was mud stiff, torn at the hem, and crusted with pine sap from where she had been dragged after stumbling on scree. She held her spine straight anyway, not for pride, for spite. Cain rode beside the wagon as if escorting a bride. His cloak was lined in fox fur, his gloves spotless, his smile patient in the way a butcher might smile at a restless animal. When she had asked where he was taking her, he did not strike her. He only leaned close enough that she could smell clove oil on his breath and said very calmly, "Do not confuse blood with protection, Alara. Blood is leverage. You are finally worth what I can get for you." At the fortress gate, he dismounted first and handed her chain to a Nightshade guard captain without meeting her eyes. "Treaty tribute," he said. "Daughter line Ashford, unwed, fertile, delivered intact." Then, with practiced grief in his voice for the audience gathered on the wall walk, he added, "May this poor girl's sacrifice prevent further losses between our packs." She had stared at him in disbelief so sharp it hollowed her out. He had engineered the border slaughter himself. She knew it, knew the odd patrol orders, the missing signal fires, the way his wolves returned with new coin and no wounds. Yet he stood beneath another Alpha's banner and performed sorrow like prayer. The great hall of Nightshade smelled of wet stone, tallow smoke, and old iron. Wolves lined the edges of the chamber in disciplined ranks, armor catching torchlight in hard bands of copper and gold. At the far end sat Theron Nightshade on a raised basalt dais, broad-shouldered, unmoving, built less like a man than like part of the mountain that held his keep. Stories had painted him merciless, untouchable, a ruler who had outlived allies and enemies alike without bending for either. He did not speak when she was brought in. His gaze traveled once over her chains, once over Cain, then settled on the satchel taken from her at the gate. A scribe broke the wax seal. Papers spilled across the judgment table. Receipts, border maps. A ledger wrapped in oilskin, stamped with Cain's private mark. Murmurs thickened at once. The scribe read with a shaking voice. Payment received for transfer of Ashford female asset. Additional consideration upon confirmation of viable issue. Clause. The Ashford heir's womb will be delivered to whichever claimant secures council influence. Silence hit the hall like a dropped blade. Cain lunged for the table, but Nightshade guards pinned him by both arms. "Forgery!" he barked. "She carried those papers to smear me. She is unstable. She lies." Alara laughed once, short and without humor. "You taught me letters so I could copy your hand. You also forgot I learned your numbers." Theron rose. The movement alone shifted the room. "Unchain her." The captain nearest her hesitated. "My Alpha, the treaty protocol states tribute remains restrained until council verification." Theron did not raise his voice. "Unchain. Her." The lock snapped open. Metal fell from her wrists with a sound she felt in her teeth. Blood surged into her hands in hot needles. She swayed, more from shock than weakness, and looked up because instinct told her she had to watch the ruler whose decision now held her life. His scent reached her first. Cedar and frost and something older. a deep, wild note that struck her like memory from a life she had never lived. Heat rushed across her skin, then vanished so fast her knees nearly gave out from the cold that followed. Her pulse thundered in her ears. A taut line seemed to form under her sternum and pull, unrelenting, toward his chest each time he breathed. Theron's eyes changed. Amber bled into his irises, brightening into molten light. His hand closed over the edge of the dais hard enough to crack stone. Then, in full view of his court, he dropped to one knee. Gasps broke across the chamber. Inside her mind, panic and hunger collided until language fractured. This could not be real. This could not be safe. She knew what men did with vows when power was at stake. She knew what hands felt like when they held a woman down and called it duty. Run, stay, breathe. Do not trust the pull. Do not trust the warmth spreading through her ribs. Yet the bond kept tightening, thread to thread, breath to breath, and the animal part of her kept naming him with an absolute certainty she could not bear. He was mine. The thought landed like fire and prayer together. He was mine. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to tear it out. He was mine, and the truth of it terrified her more than the chains had. Theron stood slowly, as if his own body had startled him. "Take Cain Thornwood to the lower cells," he said, voice roughened at the edges. "Seal his accounts. No one leaves this fortress without my order." Cain twisted against the guards, face blotched with rage. "You cannot hold me. She is treaty property." Theron's gaze went feral. "She is under nightshade protection." That should have sounded like safety. To Alara, it sounded like transfer. By midnight, the storm had thickened into sleet that rattled against shuttered windows. They put her in a tower chamber with a fire she did not trust, and a guard she did not know. Her wrists were salved and wrapped. Food sat untouched on a tray. Every creak of the old keep sent her shoulders up toward her ears. Sleep came in broken drops and left her with the same image each time. Cain counting coin while men argued over her body in voices almost bored. 3 hours after the bells marked second watch, footsteps halted outside her door. 2 elders entered with the captain who had received her chain at the gate. They thought she was dozing. She kept her breathing shallow and still. "The ledger will ignite war if this reaches Border Council," one elder whispered. The captain answered, "Then we bury it with the girl. Move her to the lower kennels before dawn. Isolate her until the Alpha regains judgment." "After tonight?" the second elder asked. "If she is his mate, confinement could trigger him." "Then keep him occupied with Cain's interrogation. Tribute women do not speak policy." The door shut behind them. Alara sat up so quickly the room tilted. The numbness she had carried for years cracked apart at last, replaced by a clean, hard terror. Cain had sold her to buy influence. Now another set of men discussed burying evidence and locking her away until she could be traded again under a different name. Mate bond or not, throne or not, she would not survive becoming an object in their council arithmetic. She moved at once. The room had no visible key, but the washstand basin had a thin brass pin holding one hinge in place. She worked it loose with shaking fingers and knelt at the door, listening between each careful scrape. The mechanism was old. Twice the pin slipped. On the third try, the bolt lifted. She took the corridor barefoot, cloak clutched tight, skirts hitched clear of stone. Torches hissed in their brackets. Cold bit up through her soles. She knew fortress plans only from stories, but old keeps followed old logic: stairs at corners, kitchens below central heat, exits near supply ramps. She chose down, then down again, passing carved wolves with garnet eyes that seemed to watch her as she ran. At the second landing, she heard voices and flattened into an alcove behind a tapestry. 2 guards crossed with spear shafts on their shoulders, speaking low. "Alpha ordered every gate sealed. He can order whatever he likes. Elders outrank passion." Their laughter scraped her nerves raw. When they passed, she slipped the opposite direction and found a narrow service stair spiraling toward the inner courtyard. Sleet blew through arrow slits, needling her face. Somewhere above, a horn sounded once, sharp and urgent. By the time she reached the lower passage, her breath tore in and out like she had swallowed knives. The corridor opened onto the old ward court, a ring of ruined pillars half buried in drifting snow and ash from the forged chimneys. She stopped at the threshold, chest heaving. Footsteps thundered behind her. "Do not move," Theron said. His voice struck her between shoulder blades like a command and a plea bound together. She turned anyway, hair plastered to her temples, hands lifted not in surrender but in warning. "If you put me back in that room," she said, "I will tear the walls down with my teeth." For a long beat he said nothing. Snowmelt ran from the edge of his dark hair. Gold still lived in his gaze, banked but unmistakable. "I heard what the elders planned," he said at last. "You were never going to the kennels." "Men always say never," she shot back. "Then they draft a clause." Something in his expression tightened. Not with anger, but with recognition so deep it looked like pain. More horns sounded across the fortress, this time in a staggered pattern that meant alarm at the outer ridge. Theron stepped between her and the corridor she had fled, making no move to touch her. "You can run from me," he said. "You do not run alone into a keep waking for war." She did not lower her hands. She did not trust him. But she also did not miss the way his body angled toward the passage, shielding her from whatever had just reached his gates. The horn call rolled again, lower this time, vibrating through stone and bone until Ilara felt it in her teeth. In the corridor beyond the ward court, boots struck in rapid rhythm, then stopped as a squad of nightshade wolves spilled into view with drawn blades and half-shifted claws. They were broad men and women in dark leather, rain on their shoulders, breath smoking in the cold. Every one of them froze at the same sight, their alpha standing between a treaty tribute and an open escape route, gold lit faintly in his gaze. Ilara's legs trembled from the sprint down the service stairs, from hunger, from the old reflex that said surrounded meant owned. Barefoot on frozen stone, she curled her fingers inside Theron's cloak and lifted her chin anyway. Her wrists still ached where the irons had been. Her throat brand throbbed as if it sensed an audience. "Outer ridge breach attempt," one of the soldiers said, voice clipped. He kept his eyes on Theron, but Ilara felt the weight of every peripheral glance landing on her like thrown gravel. "Not a full assault. Testing our response." Theron did not look away from her. "How many banners?" "3 visible in sleet. No standard marks yet." A smaller wolf at the back, young and still carrying adolescent sharpness in his face, stared openly at Ilara's neck before jerking his gaze down. The movement was slight, almost polite, and still it carved through her. Pity, curiosity, calculation. She had worn all 3 on other wolves' faces since she was 12. Theron finally shifted his attention to the squad. "Double inner gate guard. No elder orders outrank mine tonight. If anyone attempts to move Ilara Ashford without my direct command, treat it as mutiny." The words landed like flint striking steel. The squad's surprise flickered across their expressions, then vanished behind discipline. Fists hit chests in formal acknowledgement. They moved. Ilara watched them go, pulse still pounding. This was his territory in its truest shape. Not the ritual hall with banners and scripted deference, but the moment where fear met command and chose obedience. She had expected wolves shaped by his cruelty. What she saw instead unsettled her in a different way. They were not afraid of him in the cowering sense. They trusted him. Even when they were shocked, they trusted the line he drew. That made him more dangerous, not less. He turned toward her again. "You're shivering." "I am evaluating exits." A rough sound almost like a laugh passed his throat and disappeared at once. There are 7 from this court. 4 are dead ends behind old wardlocks. 2 lead to exposed battlements. 1 leads through the inner keep. You memorize every path your prisoners could use? I memorize every path an enemy would force you down. His jaw tightened. And every path you might choose, if panic made a narrow corridor look safer than it is. The honesty landed wrong and right at once, so precise it stripped her of prepared contempt. He gestured toward the lit passage, palm open, not touching. Come see where you are, then decide whether to run. It could have been theater. It could have been strategy. Yet she followed because the alternative was standing still, while men with keys argued over her existence. They crossed into the inner keep at a fast pace that matched her shorter stride without comment. Stone gave way to iron-grated walkways, then to a gallery overlooking Nightshade Fortress proper. The scale stole her breath. Terraced courtyards dropped in rings beneath them, each one alive with motion. Wolves hauled water barrels toward smoldering torch trenches. Smiths at portable braziers reset bent spearheads with sparks bursting orange against sleet-dark air. Medics unfurled linen beside stacked stretchers, efficient and calm, as if they had rehearsed disaster so many times fear had become a task list. Beyond the final wall, mountain pines leaned under storm wind, and farther still the ravine glimmered with scattered firelight, where hostile camps crouched like embers that refused to die. Her exhaustion caught up all at once. The world narrowed at the edges. She braced one hand against the cold parapet and swallowed hard. Run now. Keep moving. If you stop, they close around you. If you trust, they price you. If he is kind, it is because kind men still bargain when councils demand it. Theron moved a half-step closer, close enough that heat from him reached through wet wool, not close enough to crowd. Drink, he said, passing a canteen. She stared at it, then at him. Why both hands? His brows drew together, puzzled. Then understanding hit. Slowly, deliberately, he held the canteen out with both hands again, the old den gesture that proved no hidden weapon, no trick grip, no intent to seize. Because I want you to see exactly what I am doing. Something tight behind her ribs loosened by a thread. She took the canteen and drank. Water tasted of metal and snowmelt and survival. A bell clanged from the southern watchtower. 1 strike, pause, 2 strikes, signal traffic from outer scouts. A runner appeared at the gallery arch, breathless, saluted, and delivered the message straight to Theron. Lord Thornwood colors sighted on the low pass, small envoy under truce cloth. They request parley at first light. No visual on Lord Thornwood himself. Ilara's fingers locked around the canteen until her knuckles hurt. Kane's colors were already at the ridge, not days away, not rumor. Here, Theron's profile hardened into something carved. Deny parley, hold distance. If they approach bowshot, fire warning only unless attacked. Yes, my alpha. The runner hesitated, then added. Elder Marrow requests immediate custody review of the Ashford female under treaty contingency. Theron's answer came without hesitation. Denied. When the runner vanished, silence spread between them, full of horns and hammer strikes from below. Ilara set the canteen down with care she did not feel. There it is, she said. Your people call me contingency when they're polite. My elders are not my people in total, he said. They are one faction in a fortress that still believes old bargains keep us alive. She turned to face him fully, sleet damp on her lashes, fury and fear braided so tightly she could not separate them. And what do you believe keeps you alive, Alpha? His gaze held hers without flinching. Tonight? You. The word landed like a dropped torch in dry grass. Tension arced so sharply she felt it in her pulse points. Then the bond struck again. It did not arrive as a gentle realization. It came as a surge of heat that raced from the mark on her throat to her chest, then plunged cold through her limbs so fast she gasped. A current like raw electricity skated along her skin, raising every fine hair on her arms. Under her sternum, the invisible tether she had felt in the hall tightened into a living pull, insistent, relentless, each of his breaths tugging at something central and unguarded in her. Theron's sharp intake of breath answered hers like an echo. His pupils widened. Amber ignited through his irises until molten gold ringed black. One hand shot to the parapet and cracked the frost-slick stone where his fingers gripped. Below them, the fortress noise blurred, as though distance had dropped a veil over everything except the space between their bodies. No, 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 no. This is how traps work. This is chemistry and fear and proximity. This is not fate. Do not give sacred words to a body that has been cornered. Do not let longing rewrite history. He is powerful, and powerful men can kneel for effect. Yet another voice rose beneath the panic, older than language, steady as heartbeat, not effect, recognition. Alara hated how badly she wanted to believe it. She stepped back. The tether stretched, painful, a deep internal ache that made her breath hitch. Theron mirrored her by stepping back as well, giving distance despite what the pull demanded. Restraint, not chase. Again. Always that impossible restraint. "What is this?" she asked, voice rough. "Say it plain, no ritual language." His throat worked once. "Mate bond." "I was told those stories to keep girls obedient." "So was I," he said quietly. "Until mine found me and looked ready to bite through stone rather than be owned." Against her will, a fractured laugh escaped her, brief and almost wild. "That was not my finest diplomatic posture. It was magnificent." She stared at him, waiting for mockery that never came. The gallery torches guttered in a gust, throwing his features into shifting shadow and gold. Scar lines crossed one side of his neck, old and pale against darker skin. His shoulders were built for war, yet his hands stayed open, empty, visible, as if he understood her terror was not abstract but anatomical, etched into muscle memory. "Do not kneel to me again in public," she said. "They will call it weakness and use it to gut you." "I did not choose that kneel," he answered. "My body did." "Then master it." "Teach me how," he said, and there was no sarcasm in it, only raw sincerity that hit her harder than any command. The pull between them flared when wind shifted, carrying his scent full into her lungs. Cedar, snow, iron. "Home," said the treacherous part of her. She clenched her jaw until it hurt. From the far stair, heavy steps approached. Elder Marrow entered with 2 council guards, silver rings bright on his fingers, disapproval sharp as vinegar in his expression. He bowed to Theron and did not bow to Alara. "My Alpha, this display unsettles the command structure. The girl should be secured in the lower wing until the council confirms whether this bond is true or a stress response." Marrow's gaze slid over her torn hem, her bare feet, her brand. "She is frightened. Unstable. We can protect her from herself." Alara went still. There it was again, wrapped in courtesy this time. A kennel with better words. Theron took one measured step, placing his body between Marrow and Alara, broad back filling her vision. His claws edged out not fully, just enough for moonlight to catch the curved tips. "You will refer to her as Alara Ashford," he said. "You will not discuss confining her as if she is cargo." Marrow's mouth tightened. "Alpha, with respect, your judgment is compromised." "Then hear uncompromised judgment now." Theron's voice turned cold enough to frost the air. "Any wolf who questions her place questions mine in the same breath. Do you understand?" The 2 guards dropped their eyes at once. Marrow held for one dangerous moment longer, then inclined his head. "Understood." He withdrew, taking his guards with him. Their footsteps faded down stone. Ilara realized only then that her nails had bitten crescents into her palms. Theron turned back slowly, giving her time to read his face. No triumph, no demand, just vigilance and a grief she did not know how to name. The bond hummed between them, no longer a strike, but a sustained thrum, like a second pulse learning her rhythm and asking, not forcing, to stay. "Look at me," he said, very softly. She did. For a suspended heartbeat, the fortress vanished again, and there was only his gaze locked to hers, molten and unguarded, and the fierce, terrifying certainty that whatever began in that moment would either ruin them both or remake the world they had been handed. The horn sounded a third time, and the spell of that locked gaze broke under the practical violence of a fortress bracing for attack. Wind shoved sleet through the gallery arches, stinging Ilara's cheeks, and the tremor that had started in her legs during her flight returned with punishing force. She hated that her body chose that moment to betray her. She hated even more that Theron noticed. He did not reach for her. He pointed instead toward the inner stair. "You need warmth, food, and sleep, in that order." "I need leverage," she said, though the words came rough around fatigue. "Then stay alive long enough to use it." He moved beside her, not touching, a steady heat at her shoulder as they descended through the keep. The lower corridors glowed with banked firelight, all copper shadows and old stone. Wolves stepped aside when they saw them. Some bowed to Theron. More and more, Ilara noticed, bowed to her too, uncertainly, as if trying on a future they had not agreed to yet. He took her not to the tower room she had escaped, but to a chamber close to the central hearth, guarded by two women in nightshade armor with healer sashes over their leather. One had a split lip and calloused knuckles. The other carried a satchel that smelled of thyme, salt, and bitter root. Neither looked at Ilara like property. Both looked at her like a problem to solve without humiliating the patient. "That room had one door and one key you did not hold," Theron said quietly. "This one has two exits, and the bolt locks from inside." Ilara looked at him hard, searching for the hidden catch. "Why tell me where the exits are?" "Because fear breeds in blind corners." She stepped into the chamber and turned to face him from just inside the threshold. "If this is a gilded cell, I will burn it." His mouth shifted, almost a sad smile. "If I wanted you contained, you would not know the hinges." He closed the door himself, then opened it again and stood back. A silent demonstration that she controlled whether it stayed shut. Only when she nodded did he pull it to and leave the latch unfastened. By the time third watch bells rolled across the fortress, exhaustion had dragged her under for less than an hour before the nightmare found her. In sleep, Kane's steward held the branding iron over coals while her uncle counted coin behind him, each clink sounding like a lock turning. Hands pinned her wrists. Someone laughed and asked if the mark should go at her throat or lower, where a future buyer might prefer it hidden. She tried to bite through the grip on her jaw and tasted metal, ash, her own pulse. Then the dream shifted, as dreams did, and the hall at Nightshade became an auction floor where elders discussed her fertility as if quoting grain yields. She could not breathe, could not swallow, could not get the mark off. Ilara came awake with a broken cry, fingers digging at the brand on her neck hard enough to reopen healing skin. One healer lunged for her wrists to stop the damage. Another grabbed for a sedative vial. "No," Ilara gasped, thrashing. "Do not pin me, do not touch me, do not—" The door struck stone. Theron was suddenly there, drawn by the bond or the noise or both, shoulders filling the frame in dark wool and steel. One look at Ilara clawing at her own throat, and his expression changed from battle-cold to something raw and furious in a different direction. "Out," he said. "My Alpha, she's in panic, she may injure." "Out. Leave the water. Leave the salve." The healers hesitated for half a breath, then obeyed. The door shut. Silence rushed in, broken only by Alara's ragged breathing and the hiss of logs settling in the hearth. Theron stayed by the door until she saw him, really saw him, and registered that no one else remained. Then he crossed the room and lowered himself to the floor several feet away, folding long legs with the deliberate care of a man laying down a weapon in plain sight. He held a cup of water in both hands and set it on the stone between them. "I am not coming closer," he said. "You choose distance." Alara pressed her back against the bed frame, chest heaving. The skin at her throat burned where her nails had scored it. "You sent them out. They were trying to help. Your body hurt a cage." She swallowed air that felt like broken glass. "How do you know what my body heard?" For the first time, he looked away. His gaze settled on the fire as if the answer lived there and he disliked it. "Because I have seen wolves call force protection." A beat passed. "Because I have done it in war, and I know the face of terror when it looks back at me." The admission knocked the breath out of her more effectively than any argument could have. She stared at him, waiting for the justification that usually followed male confession. It did not come. He nudged the water cup a little closer, still with both hands visible. "Drink when you can." Alara watched the cup for a long time, then crawled forward on unsteady knees and took it. The first swallow trembled down her throat and did not choke. The second stayed. When she finished, she held the empty cup in her lap like proof she still existed. Theron removed his cloak, thick black wool lined with fur, and offered it without standing. "Your dress is torn at the shoulder." She looked down and saw he was right. In her panic, she had ripped the seam nearly to the collarbone. Heat rose to her face, shame automatic and sharp. He did not glance at the exposed skin. His gaze stayed on her eyes. "May I?" he asked. She nodded once. He leaned forward only enough to drape the cloak around her shoulders, then sat back to his original distance. No lingering touch. No claim disguised as comfort. Just warmth. Heavy and real. Alara wrapped the cloak tighter and listened to her own pulse gradually come down from a sprint to something survivable. The room remained quiet long enough to become dangerous again, because silence had always been the prelude to terms she did not choose. Theron seemed to read that too. He reached toward the side table and picked up a leather-bound volume she had not noticed before. The spine cracked with age, the nightshade crest stamped in tarnished silver. "What is that?" she asked, voice hoarse. "The Chronicle of the Winter Breach. Old campaign record. Bad handwriting. Worse strategy in Chapter 2. He paused. "Would you like me to read, or would you like quiet?" The question itself undid her more than the nightmare had. She had not been asked what she liked in years. She looked at him, then at the cup in her hands, then back to him. "Read." He opened the Chronicle and began. His voice was lower than in the gallery, stripped of command and sharpened edges. He read troop movements, weather notes, casualties counted by name instead of number. He read about a Nightshade scout who disobeyed orders to carry an injured rival wolf across a frozen ravine, then returned to face discipline and was pardoned when the rival later brokered peace. He read about walls failing and being rebuilt, about supply lines and burned bridges and the stubborn mathematics of survival. When the script turned cramped and hard to parse, he slowed, sounding out archaic words with dry patience that might have been funny in another life. At one point, Ilara gave a short, frayed laugh when he muttered, "Whoever wrote this believed punctuation was a personal insult." The corner of his mouth lifted. He also believed maps were decorative. The laugh hurt her throat and healed something else. Her mind kept trying to dart back to old terror, but the cadence of his reading gave it a rail to follow instead. Not sweetness, not seduction. Rhythm. Predictable, steady, ordinary in the way storms never were. She watched his hands turn pages with care disproportionate to paper, and understood, with wary shock, that restraint was not an act he performed for her alone. It was a discipline he had built into bone, because power without discipline had cost him too much already. When moonlight thinned at the shutter edges and the hearth dropped to embers, Ilara's eyelids went heavy. The last thing she heard before sleep took her properly was Theron reading a line about defenders holding through a blizzard by rotating watch every 20 heartbeats so no one froze alone. When she woke again, pale dawn washed the chamber walls. Theron still sat on the floor, back against stone, the closed chronicle resting on one knee. He had not slept. He had not moved close enough to startle her. He was watching the door, guarding like a wolf at Denmouth. He noticed her breathing change and looked over. Morning. She touched the cloak around her shoulders, then the bandage at her throat, freshly changed while she slept in a way she had not felt. You stayed. Yes. Why? His answer came without flourish. Because leaving would have felt like abandonment, and I would rather fight 10 breaches than become one. The words settled deep, quieter than vows and heavier. By late morning, the council bell summoned the fortress leadership to the tribunal hall. Theron offered Ilara the choice before they entered. You can stay in guarded chambers and send your position through me, or stand beside me and speak for yourself. The old instinct shouted, stay hidden. Hidden meant harder to target. Hidden also meant absent when men rewrote facts in her name. I speak, she said. The tribunal chamber had no throne, only a long stone table ringed by carved seats and banners stiff with age. Elder Marrow sat at the center with 3 other elders and 6 ranking officers, including the captain who had mocked tribute women in the corridor last night. Kane's ledger lay on the table under a paperweight of black iron, its presence a blade everyone pretended not to see. As Ilara and Theron approached, conversation thinned to brittle silence. Marrow folded his hands. Given the bond irregularity and active external threat, this council recommends temporary confinement of Ilara Ashford in the lower wing for pack safety until succession and treaty liabilities are reviewed. There it was again, dressed in legal language, a cage with clerical flourishes. Ilara opened her mouth, but Captain Var cut across her, sneer plain. With respect, we should not be taking policy from tribute stock. Women traded under treaty do not address this table. Theron moved. One moment he was beside her. The next he stood between Ilara and the tribunal, palms on stone, claws extending and driving into the table's edge with a crack that rang through the chamber. Granite spidered under his grip. His voice was quiet enough that everyone leaned in to hear it. Any wolf who questions her place questions my rule in the same breath. No one spoke. Theron turned his head toward Var, and something ancient looked through his eyes, not rage alone but judgment sharpened by control. Kneel. Var stiffened. My alpha, kneel. The captain's chair scraped back. He dropped to one knee on the flagstones, face flushed dark with humiliation. Theron did not release the table. You will swear fealty to Ilara Ashford by name. You will acknowledge her protection, voice, and standing under Nightshade law. Var's jaw clenched. Theron waited, utterly still, claws buried in stone as if patience were another form of force. At last Var bowed his head. I swear fealty to Ilara Ashford. I acknowledge her protection, voice, and standing under Nightshade law. Again, Theron said, as if you mean it. Var drew a breath that shook once. I swear fealty to Ilara Ashford. I acknowledge her protection, voice, and standing under Nightshade law. Theron withdrew his claws. Fractured stone dusted the table edge like gray snow. He stepped aside, clearing space for Ilara, and inclined his head to her in front of the full council. Not a dramatic kneel, a deliberate transfer of the floor. Speak, he said. Ilara felt every eye in the chamber, every old script waiting for her to falter. Fear rose, but it did not own her this time. She set her palm on Kane's ledger, grounding herself in evidence instead of panic. "You call me Risk," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "The risk is already inside your walls. Kane Thornwood purchased loyalty at your borders and sold my name as collateral. If you hide me, you help him. If you silence me, you repeat him. I am Ashford by blood and Nightshade by claimed protection. I will not enter another locked room so men can negotiate over my body and call it strategy." She looked from elder to captain, holding each gaze until they either met it or dropped it. "Use me correctly," she continued. "My bloodline carries ward authority tied to old Ashford stones on this fortress perimeter. You want safety. Give me access to your ward court, your maps, and your watch reports. Then judge my stability by whether your walls hold." A murmur ran around the table, not mocking now, but startled calculus. Marrow's eyes narrowed, then shifted to Theron. "If this fails, the cost is catastrophic." Theron answered without looking away from Alara. "If we sideline her, failure is guaranteed." Silence stretched. Finally, Marrow gave a curt nod. "Conditional approval. Ilara Ashford is granted supervised ward access and advisory standing for siege planning." It was not respect. Not yet. It was entry. When the council adjourned, Wolves stood as Theron did, then paused and stood again for Ilara, awkwardly synchronized, as if learning a new ritual in real time. Var remained kneeling until she passed. Outside the chamber, the corridor smelled of rain and forge smoke. Ilara stopped, suddenly unsteady not from fear this time, but from the strain of holding herself upright through judgment and memory. Theron halted a pace away. "Did I overstep?" She almost said yes by reflex. Instead, she considered the cracked stone table, the forced oath, the way he had made room for her voice rather than speaking over it. "You terrified them," she said. His expression did not shift. "I was aiming for clarity." Against her own caution, the edge of her mouth lifted. "Then your aim was excellent." The answer that mattered came next, quieter. She held out her hand, not as surrender, not as ownership, but as choice made in daylight. After one startled beat, Theron placed his hand beneath hers, supporting, not enclosing. For the first time since chains closed on her wrists at the mountain pass, Ilara let some small, defended part of her weight rest there. Her fingers had barely settled against his palm when a runner rounded the corridor corner so fast he skidded on wet stone, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other holding a sealed tube striped in black wax. "My Alpha, from the low pass, truce envoy did not cross the warning line." He swallowed, then looked at Ilara because Wolves had already learned the new axis of this fortress. "They fired this over the wall." Theron took the tube and broke it open with his thumb. The parchment inside was stiff with weather, and marked in a hand Ilara recognized instantly, every stroke precise and smug, letters spaced like little acts of control. Kane. The corridor narrowed around her. She heard only Theron's breathing as his eyes moved down the page. Then once more, slower, with a stillness that meant fury under discipline. "Read it," Ilara said. He handed it to her. "To Alpha, Theron Nightshade, who keeps what is not his. You house stolen Ashford property under false sentiment and call it law. Return Ilara Ashford and all issues she carries under her bloodline within 1 hour of moonrise, and I will permit orderly withdrawal from disputed border holdings. Refuse, and I enact Inheritance Clause 7, witnessed by 3 border captains and 2 council signatories. I am prepared to claim by force what treaty already grants. For each quarter hour you delay after moonrise, 1 Nightshade civilian taken outside your lower trade road will be executed in view of your east wall. Send out the Ashford womb and sign transfer, or watch your people pay for your vanity." Kane Thornwood Ilara read it twice. The second time she noticed the phrase buried in the center like a knife wrapped in silk. all issues she carries. Her hand went to her abdomen without thought. Theron saw the gesture, and something hardened in his face with lethal clarity. He knows, she said. He is guessing from your scent pattern and healer traffic, Theron answered. Or he has someone reporting from inside. Jail wardens confirmed an hour ago that Kane is still in his cell. This is his command network moving on orders he ceded before imprisonment. He turned to the runner. Lock all gatehouse signal rooms. No messages out without my sigil and Ilara's mark both. Bring Captain Soren, Quartermaster Hale, and the ward keepers to the strategy chamber now. The runner vanished. Ilara folded the letter once, exactly on Kane's signature, and felt her old life line up in a brutal pattern. Kane had never cared about peace. He wanted legal language, seals, witnesses, a story he could sell later. He would set villages burning and call it succession administration. He would name coercion inheritance. He would take infants and claim stewardship. She looked up. Clause 7 is real, but he is twisting it. It only activates if an Ashford line dies without declared guardian, or if both packs dissolve command in wartime. He caused the border massacre so he could argue collapse. He sold me as tribute so he could claim I entered transfer status. Then he bought captains to witness his version. Theron held her gaze. Can you prove that to wolves who want quick certainty more than truth? Yes, she said, with the full ledger, border pay records, and oath testimony from whoever he bribed badly. A primary consideration pressed under every other one. 1 hour to moonrise meant his field proxies were already in position. They moved. The strategy chamber sat above the inner armory, windowless and warm from forge flues running through the walls. A relief map of the valley dominated the center table, carved ridges and passes rubbed smooth by generations of command hands. Wolves streamed in, wet cloaks, sharpened eyes, controlled fear. Ilara recognized Soren from the ridge reports and Hale from supply rotations. 3 ward keepers arrived together, palms inked with rune ash, expressions flinty. Theron placed Kane's letter on the table. Read, then speak once, clearly. No one spoke while they read. When they finished, Quartermaster Hale exhaled through his nose. This is not a bluff about hostages. We lost contact with 2 caravans near the lower trade road at dusk. Ilara's stomach tightened. How many civilians? 37 by manifest, Hale said. Families and hired drivers. Soren tapped the carved map near the eastern ravine. If Kane has mercenaries and disloyal border wolves, he can rotate pressure points. He threatens executions at the east wall because he wants our archers pinned there while he probes the north gate. Or he wants us to think that, said one ward keeper, an older woman named Ilya, whose silver braids were tied in practical knots. She studied Ilara, not unkindly. If he wants the Ashford line alive, he attacks our ward lattice, not just stone. These pillars were built with dual blood permissions, Ashford and Nightshade. We have one. We may have both now. The room shifted on that sentence. Theron looked to Ilara. You said in council to use you correctly. This is the moment. Fear rose, clean and immediate. So did resolve. Take me to the ward court, she said. I can open dormant channels and reinforce the inner ring. If Kane breaches outer gates, he meets stone and runes instead of corridors and nurseries. By the last week of harvest, the mountain nights had turned knife cold, and storm wind carried iron from the siege camps into every breath. They crossed the keep at speed. At each turn, Ilara felt the bond as a low thrum, persistent, steadying, and dangerous in equal measure. Attraction under siege was not soft. It was sharpened by proximity, by the knowledge that one wrong choice could kill strangers and children and everything fragile they had begun to build. Theron kept pace half a step behind her through narrow stairs, close enough to catch if she slipped, far enough to leave room for her own momentum. At the ward court, Runic pillars rose from frozen ground like dark teeth, their carved lines buried under years of soot and weather. Ilya handed Alara a ritual blade with a horn handle worn to satin. A drop each pillar to wake. A full palm if you mean to bind. Alara took the blade. Her hand shook once, then steadied. If I faint, slap me and keep me upright. Ilya's mouth twitched. That is the least ceremonial instruction I have heard in 30 years. For a brief, startled moment, Ilara almost smiled. She cut her palm and pressed blood to the first pillar. The rune grooves drank red and lit from within, silver threads racing upward in branching lines. Cold slammed through her arm to her shoulder, then heat answered from deep in her chest as if two climates had collided under her skin. The second pillar lit faster. By the third, the whole court hummed, a vibration too low for ears and too clear for bone. She swayed. Theron's hand hovered at her back, not touching until she nodded once. Then his palm settled between her shoulders, broad and grounding. Inside her, thought and instinct argued in the present tense, urgent and intimate. I am standing in a fortress that once chained me by treaty, and now asks for my blood by name. I am letting a male with king in his title hold me upright while I bleed on old stone. I should recoil. I should close every door. Yet his hand stays where I permit. No higher, no claim. He waits for every consent as if it is law. The bond pulls like tide, and fear says tide drowns. Another part of me says tide also carries. If I choose him, it will not be because fate corners me. It will be because I watched him make space where men before him built cages, and my body has started to believe what my mind is still interrogating. The fourth pillar flared brighter than the rest. Ilya hissed between her teeth. That one was dead for a century. Not dead, Ilara said, breathless. Starved. A messenger burst into the court with ash on his sleeves. Fire in lower grain sheds. 2 points, opposite ends. Looks coordinated. Hail, arriving seconds later, confirmed with grim precision. Sabotage. Oil jars hidden in barley stacks. We found one servant trying to signal the ridge with mirror flash. He bit through his tongue before questioning. Theron's jaw tightened. Inside leak confirmed. Kane's scheme snapped into fuller focus. Hostage threat outside. Arson inside. Legal claim letter to fracture council unity. Bribed witnesses positioned to certify his narrative once panic forced concessions. He was not merely besieging walls. He was manufacturing legitimacy in real time through agents carrying his orders. Ilara wiped blood down her wrist and took a breath that tasted of snow and smoke. He is counting on division between your elders, your command, and your ward keepers. Keep everyone in shared rooms, no isolated decisions. And send a crier through the inner courtyards with the exact hostage count. Secrecy will breed rumors faster than flame. Theron looked at her as if memorizing the shape of her under pressure. Done. The crier's bell began within minutes, voice carrying numbers and instructions across stone terraces. Panic did not vanish, but it changed form. Wolves moved with purpose rather than scattered fear. 3 hours passed in grinding bursts of work. Ilara and Ilya moved pillar to pillar, reinforcing lines, mapping weak joints where frost had cracked foundation mortar. Theron rotated between gates, armory, and ward court, returning each time with new reports and the same controlled intensity. Twice their hands met over map markers. Twice the bond surged hard enough that Ilara had to brace her breathing. Neither spoke about it. Both adapted around it like commanders adjusting to weather. At moonrise minus 20 minutes, a second projectile arced over the east wall and shattered in the inner yard. This one carried not a letter, but a strip of dark cloth tied around a caravan bell Ilara recognized from Ashford trade routes, its tone bent out of shape by force. Attached was a single sentence. Quarter hour begins at moonrise. Watch your wall. No one in the yard pretended this was theater now. Theron gave clipped orders. Archers to east wall under shield cover. Runners to every infirmary post. No heroics outside gate range. Hold formation. Protect non-combatants first. Then he turned to Alara. The bond between them tightened into an almost audible line. You go to the inner birthing wing and stay with guards. She met him with equal force. No, if the wards fail, your birthing wing is a trap. I stay where the lattice can be fed. You are already overextended. I am also the reason his legal claim exists, and the reason it can be broken. Rain began again, thin and needling. The eastern sky glowed with reflected fire from siege braziers. Moonrise silvered the edges of the fortress towers. Then, from beyond the wall, a horn blew in Cain's cadence, 4 short, 1 long. A scream followed, distant, human. Cut off quickly. Every wolf on the east parapet went rigid. Another horn answered from the north ridge, then another from the ravine. Torches ignited in staggered lines, revealing ranks where darkness had hidden them. Mercenary shields, border pack colors turned inside out to mask allegiance, siege ladders carried low through brush. Cain had not sought negotiation. Imprisoned or not, his proxies were staging a legal spectacle under cover of mass assault. The first volley struck the outer battlements, arrows hissing and thudding into timber screens. A second volley followed with pitch-wrapped heads, flames blooming where they landed. Bells erupted across Nightshade Fortress. In the ward court, the activated pillars pulsed silver, then faltered as something slammed the outer lattice from multiple angles. Ilya shouted over the rising din. They are testing all rings at once. If the inner channel drops, they breach in less than an hour. Alara pressed her bleeding palm to the central stone. Pain shot up her arm to her spine. The runes brightened, held, flickered. From the gatehouse tower came Soren's roar. Battering frame at North Gate, 2 rams, heavy. The mountain shook under impact. Theron stepped in front of Alara as splinters of stone jumped from a nearby pillar. His hand found hers at the rune face, fingers locking around blood and cold. Stay with me, he said, voice low, fierce, utterly steady amid alarms and fire and rain. Do not give him your breath. Another strike hit the north gate. Deeper this time. Wood screamed. A tight, crushing pain seized low in Alara's abdomen and folded her forward against the stone, sharp enough to steal sound from her throat. She looked up at Theron, rain and ash on his face, and understood with a clarity that felt like falling. Cain had timed his assault to Moonrise, to hostages, to law, to sabotage, and now to her body. The siege had begun, and labor had found her in the same heartbeat. Another contraction tore through her, low and crushing, and Alara folded against the runestone with a sound she could not swallow back. Theron caught her under the arms as her knees hit the frozen ground. We move you now. No. The word came out jagged. She gripped his wrist hard enough to feel tendon shift beneath skin. Not to a room. Not tonight. The north gate took another impact, a deep concussive blow that shuddered through the ward court and sent frost dust drifting from pillar tops. Across the fortress, bells changed cadence from alarm to breach protocol. Wolves shouted positions from parapets. Somewhere on the east wall, a horn gave Cain's quarter-hour signal, followed by the collective intake of breath from defenders forced to witness what his letter had promised. No one repeated details. They did not need to. Ilya knelt beside Alara, hand hovering over her belly with practiced hesitation. Labor is active. We need heat, boiled water, clean linen, and a surface that is not stone. We need the lattice alive first, Alara said, teeth clenched against the next wave of pain. She pressed her bleeding palm harder into the central rune until silver lines flared. If the inner ring drops, your birthing wing becomes a trap and a ledger entry. Theron's jaw locked. For one heartbeat she thought he would overrule her and carry her anyway. Then he exhaled once, sharp and controlled, and turned toward the nearest captain. Soren, inner rampart, ward side. Move 3 midwives, 2 healers, shield team, and hot water from armory braziers. Strip mortar from the collapsed west stair and bring every loose block you can carry. Soren blinked rain from his lashes. You are fortifying the birthing position. I am fortifying my Luna's command post, Theron said. Go. The word Luna cracked through the storm like a banner snapping to full stretch. Wolves moved. Alara tried to stand. Another contraction hit, stronger, and she bent over with both hands braced on the rune base, breath stuttering. In the present tense panic of her own body, everything narrowed to 3 truths: pain, cold, time. I am split open by pressure and still expected to think. I am terrified and still expected to choose. If I let them carry me out of this court, Cain wins with paperwork and fire. If I stay, I may break here in front of everyone. Then break, she told herself. Break and keep moving. Theron crouched in front of her, rain and soot streaking his face. Alara, look at me. She did. Can you walk to the inner rampart if I take your weight? Yes. If that changes, you tell me. You do not spend strength pretending. A fractured laugh escaped her on the edge of a groan. You picked a very strange night to become reasonable. His mouth twitched despite the siege. I have had centuries to practice being difficult. Ilya barked at 2 ward keepers for fresh bandages and a birthing kit. Move. We have 1 laboring mother and an army of fools. They crossed the court in a storm of noise. Arrows clattered off shield rims, burning pitch hissed where rain struck flame. Alara leaned into Theron's side and forced her feet to keep cadence with his stride. At the inner rampart, masons and soldiers had already cleared a crescent of space behind waist-high stone. Midwives spread blankets over stacked grain sacks. Healers set copper pots beside coals hauled from the forge. Then the outer north gate boomed again, wood fibers screaming under a ram head reinforced with iron. A runner slammed into the rampart alcove, breath shredding. Outer gate hinge cracked, mercenary shields advancing under wet hides. They have hooked chains on the lower bars. Theron did not turn. Hold the choke point. Fall back by rings, not in panic. No one opens inner killyard gates without my mark and Alara's. Alara's hands went to her abdomen as another wave seized her, this one dropping her to 1 knee. Warmth spread down her thighs. One of the midwives looked up, eyes steady despite the thunder of battle. Waters have broken. The siege and the birth had become the same event. By half an hour after moonrise, the inner rampart looked less like a fortress wall and more like a living machine built from desperation and discipline. Shield wolves rotated in pairs to block incoming fire. Healers moved between stations with boiled cloths and knotweed tincture. Ilya stood at Alara's shoulder, translating pain into timing with ruthless calm. Now breathe. Hold the rune with your left hand. Push when I say. Alara obeyed, then cried out as pressure ripped through her spine. With her right hand she took the horn-handled blade, reopened the cut in her palm, and slapped blood onto the nearest pillar seam. Silver shot through the carved channel and leapt across to the next post, then the next, until the inner ring burned with cold light. The ward answered her like a great lung taking breath. It also answered inside her skull. Not words at first. Directions. Heat signatures. Gate strain. Archer line thinning on the eastern ledge. Pack mines brushing hers at the edge of panic as the awakened lattice turned her awareness into a web stretched across stone and heartbeat. She reeled. Theron steadied her from behind, both hands braced at her ribs without crowding her belly. Tell me what you see. North brace failing in 3 points, she gasped. Move 6 to the left parapet notch. Keep the right fake lane open. They are funneling toward the narrowest mouth because they think it is weakest. She swallowed hard as another contraction mounted. It is not weakest. It is where we can close on them. Theron relayed orders in clipped commands that leapt from captain to captain. Within minutes, wolves shifted positions exactly as she had seen they must. The next ram strike landed into reinforced braces instead of split timber. The sound changed from tearing to dull impact. She clung to the rune post, panting. Again. Ilya's hand pressed her lower back. Again. Ilara bled another line into stone. Light surged brighter. The inner Killyard gates slammed down with a metallic roar as the ward recognized her authority and locked to her pulse. Around them, Theron and a squad hauled shattered masonry from the collapsed stair and stacked it block by block into a curved barricade around the birthing space, his shoulders straining under weight that should have required 3 wolves. He built fast, methodical, each stone seated against the next until a chest-high wall enclosed Ilara, the midwives, and the central rune plinth. Arrows struck his backplate and glanced away with hard sparks. He did not slow. "Theron!" she shouted over the din. "You are taking fire." "Then I will finish faster." A young guard dropped beside the wall, eyes wide. "My Alpha, the outer gate is gone." The statement landed 1 second before the sound reached them. A rolling crash. Then the roar of men and wolves flooding into the first court. Ilara bore down with a cry that tore her throat raw. Ilya's voice cut through everything. "Head is there. Do not fight it. Push." She pushed. The world narrowed to heat, pressure, shaking muscle, and Theron's voice at her ear counting breaths with her, as if each one were a vow. Then suddenly there was release, a thin, fierce cry rising above steel and storm. "One healthy boy," the midwife announced, lifting a slick, squalling infant into warm cloth and immediate shelter behind the stone curve, where 2 healers waited with dry blankets and a heated cradle pan. Ilara sobbed once, from relief and pain braided together. She reached for the child, kissed his damp forehead, then handed him back to the healer when another contraction hit with doubled force. "Second is coming," Ilya said. "Fast." A captain vaulted the barricade, bloodless with urgency. "Breach at the Killyard mouth. Small strike team. Leader wearing Thornwood signet." Cain had entered the fortress. Theron's gaze went feral, amber burning through his irises. "Seal this ring," he ordered. Ilara grabbed his arm. "No. Open the Killyard throat and close the exits behind him. Trap him where the ward can judge." Their eyes locked. He understood immediately. Done. She slammed her palm onto the central rune. Silver blasted along the foundation lines. The narrow passage into the inner yard yawned open just enough to invite a charging enemy, then clanged shut behind the first wave with a teeth-rattling finality. Cain and 6 wolves found themselves boxed inside a stone rectangle lit by Ashford Nightshade ward fire, cut off from retreat and from reinforcements. He strode through smoke in a wet black cloak, signet chain at his throat, expression bright with triumph that curdled when he saw Ilara upright behind the barricade, hair plastered to her face, one newborn's cry ringing from safety behind her wall. "Blood makes ownership," Cain shouted, voice carrying over clashing steel. "You were born into contract, girl. Hand over the heirs, and I can still make this orderly." Ilara's whole body shook with labor, fury, and power. "Blood makes responsibility. You sold yours." Cain lunged toward the barricade. Theron met him in 3 strides, impact slamming both men into wardlit stone. Cain's hired wolves tried to flank, but silver lines erupted under their boots and drove them to their knees, pinned by the very law they had come to counterfeit. Another contraction bent Ilara nearly in half. Ilya held her shoulders. Now. This one now. She pushed through a cry that seemed to split the storm itself. The second twin crowned, then slid into waiting hands, his cry joining his brother's in a fierce, miraculous duet that cut through battle noise like bells. "Second boy, breathing strong," the midwife said, already wrapping him and tucking both infants together against heated cloth in the protected nook behind the barricade. Cain heard the cries and went wild, clawing at Theron's grip. Mine by claws and bloodline. Theron slammed him back against stone and bared his throat to Alara without taking his hand from Kane's chest and offering a final judgment. Your law, Alara. She rose on shaking legs, blood on her palm, milk and rain and ash on her skin, and stepped to the edge of the wall. Her voice carried clear through the kill yard. By Ashford inheritance law and Nightshade war right, I strip Kane Thornwood of claim, name, and guardianship. Witnessed by Ward, witnessed by Pack. She pressed her bloodied hand to the signet at his throat. Runes ignited. Silver bands lashed out from the ground and coiled up Kane's arms and chest like forged vines. He screamed and fought, but the light tightened, not crushing flesh, crushing symbols. The stolen signet chain snapped with a sharp metallic crack, its seal fracturing in her palm. Kane's face twisted with disbelief and hatred. You were mine to trade. Alara held his gaze, voice calm as winter stone. I was never yours. The runes constricted once more, then went still. Kane sagged as the light released him, body dropping hard to the ward-marked floor, unmoving. For one suspended heartbeat, the courtyard held its breath. Then the trapped mercenaries threw down weapons. On the parapets above, Nightshade wolves roared victory into rain and smoke, while below the barricade, two newborns cried strong and stubborn, alive at the center of the storm their mother had refused to surrender to. The victory roar was still echoing when Alara's legs gave way. Theron caught her before she struck stone, one arm around her back, the other shielding both wrapped infants as Ilya guided them through the barricade gap into the inner infirmary court. Rain had thinned to a cold mist, and the ward pillars still glowed with silver veins, pulsing in time with Alara's unsteady breath. Behind them, Sorin's wolves secured the killyard, disarming the last mercenaries and binding Kane's surviving captains in pairs. Hale arrived with two scribes and a lockbox, face ash-streaked and intent, and took custody of every piece of proof in full view of witnesses. Kane's broken signet, the blood letter, the second threat strip tied to the caravan bell, and the oilskin ledger recovered from tribunal lock. No private vault, Alara said through clenched teeth as another afterpain gripped her. Archive chest in the Great Hall, 3 seals, mine, Theron's, and council. Hale bowed. Done. I have already sent runners to fetch the border payrolls from Kane's confiscated wagons. Ilya gave a short nod of approval, then handed Alara her first twin and settled the second against her other arm. Two furious little faces, red and perfect, both alive, both loud enough to cut through the ringing in her ears. Alara bent her head, breathing in milk-sweet skin under smoke and rain, and the tight knot behind her ribs loosened for the first time in years. Theron crouched in front of her, wet hair hanging over his brow, armor scored where arrows had struck. The gate is held. East Wall hostages are being recovered now. Sorin sent the fastest team through the ravine cut as soon as Kane fell. She searched his face for any mercy-softened lie and found none, only brutal care. Tell me when you have names. I will. By first light, the siege fires had been stamped out, and the infirmary courtyard smelled of boiled linen, wet pine, and crushed marigold. Exhausted wolves moved like ghosts between cots, but no one stepped into the circle Ilya had cleared around Alara, Theron, and the twins. Marrow came at sunrise with the council rings on his hand, and age carved into his mouth like old stone. He stopped at the edge of the paving and bowed, not shallowly. I was wrong, he said, voice rough. Not about danger, about you. Alara held his gaze. What did Kane promise you? Marrow flinched at the precision. Not me. Captain Rusk and 2 trade delegates. Transit rights, private tariffs, inherited offices. I saw the ledger notation and gave that look you noticed in tribunal because I feared how deep the rot went. I should have spoken then. Rusk? Theron's tone went flat. Hale already has him in irons, Marrow answered. The jail warden who confirmed Kane's cell status has also confessed he delayed one runner by order of a bribed clerk. No messages escaped the fortress after your dual sigil order. That report was true. Every dangling thread drew tight, not neatly. Truth rarely was, but openly. When the last healer withdrew and the courtyard quieted to the crackle of braziers, Theron rose, removed his gauntlets, and set them on the stone beside the twins' cradle basket. He knelt in front of Alara on both knees, not as spectacle now, but as vow made where blood and rain had mixed. He tipped his head, baring the strong line of his throat. Ilara Ashford, he said, voice low and unguarded, I ask to claim and be claimed. Not as treaty, not as rank, as choice. Do you consent? She could feel every wolf in the courtyard holding still, waiting on her answer alone. She shifted one twin to Ilya's careful arms, then the other, and placed both hands on Theron's face, thumbs rough against stubble and dried rain. Yes, she whispered. I choose you. Heat pulsed beneath her skin before he even touched her, the bond tightening from sternum to sternum like a drawn thread made bright. Theron lifted one hand to the back of her neck, giving her time to turn away if she wished. She did not. She angled her head, exposing the junction of shoulder and throat where her pulse jumped hard. His bite was controlled and precise, a sharp flare of pain that made her gasp and grip his forearm. For one taut heartbeat, it burned, primal and clean. Then the burn transformed, spreading as molten warmth through her chest, down her spine, out along her arms until her fingers trembled with it. Gold light spilled at the edge of her vision, not blinding, but intimate, as if someone had opened a locked door inside her and filled the room with firelight. She felt him through the mark as clearly as her own pulse, his restraint, his hunger held in reverence, his terror of failing her, his fierce joy as the bond accepted what both of them had fought. Mine, his wolf breathed across the link, not possession, recognition. Mate. Theron pulled back at once, licking the mark closed with ceremonial care, forehead resting briefly against hers while both of them shook. Yours, he said against her skin, voice breaking on the word. Ilara cupped the back of his neck and drew him lower. My turn. His eyes lifted to hers, asking again without words. She nodded once. He bared his throat further, pulse beating strong under scar and skin. Ilara leaned in and bit over that pulse point, not as hard as he could have bitten her, but enough to break skin and seal reciprocity. Copper touched her tongue. The bond surged. It did not feel like being overtaken. It felt like two currents aligning. Memories and instincts rushed through the opened link in luminous fragments. Him sitting on cold stone reading through the night so she would not wake alone. Her blood on ward runes while contractions tore through her. His hands building a wall one block at a time under arrow fire. Her voice stripping Kane's claim in front of the pack. Pain dissolved into a deep, anchoring warmth that settled behind her ribs and stayed. Mate, her own wolf answered, clear as bells. Mine. Yours. When she released him, a thin line of blood traced his throat before the mark sealed with a faint shimmer of gold. Theron exhaled as if he had been holding breath for centuries. He rose just enough to gather her carefully into his arms, mindful of stitches, bruises, newborn fragility, and still she fit against him as if the space had been waiting. Together, almost laughing at the symmetry of it, they whispered the same vow into each other's skin. No more bargaining, only choosing. The courtyard breathed again. Ilya wiped her eyes with the back of an irritated hand and pretended it was smoke. Soren thumped his fist to his chest. Hale, practical even now, snapped his lockbox shut and told a scribe to note the hour, witnesses, and mutual marks in both legal registers. Marrow bowed his head. Var, kneeling at the perimeter since dawn by his own request, pressed his palm to stone and swore service a third time, this round, steady, and unforced. 7 nights later, the great hall blazed with torchlight and winter moon through high slits in the wall. The archive chest stood open at the center table with all evidence displayed and accounted for. Ledger, payrolls, threat letters, broken signet, caravan bell, and testimony tablets signed by captured conspirators. Hale read each chain of custody aloud. Ilya confirmed the ward readings that matched Ilara's blood activation times. Soren reported every hostage recovered, naming the dead with honor and the living with relief. No report vanished into convenient silence. Border captains were brought under guard to answer Clause 7 before full council. With the ledger entries, witness statements, and runic records aligned, Kane's legal claim collapsed in public, not rumor. His seized coin, stored grain, and trade rights were reassigned by decree to rebuild the burned lower villages and compensate families from the trade road. The economic engine of his scheme was dismantled stone by stone. Then Marrow stepped forward with the twin seals of Ashford and Nightshade on a black cushion and addressed the hall in a voice that carried to the rafters. Ilara Ashford of the joined line, ward-bearer at siege, mother of protected heirs, recognized mate of Theron Nightshade, is hereby invested as High Luna and co-ruler with independent authority over ward law, diplomacy, and den sanctuary. Theron did not place the circlet on her as if crowning an ornament. He held it while she took it herself and set it on her own head. The room went to one knee. Later, after formal oaths, Ilara stood on the fortress terrace with one twin asleep on her shoulder and the other in Theron's arms. Below them, rescued caravan children chased each other between rebuilt braziers, while Var supervised nursery guards with severe concentration and surprising gentleness. Ilya argued with Hale about supply ledgers and won. Soren laughed for the first time Ilara had heard, loud and unembarrassed. Marrow watched the courtyard from a distance, old grief and new loyalty sharing the same posture. Theron shifted closer until their shoulders touched. "What do we call them?" he murmured, glancing at the boys. Ilara looked over the walls he had built by hand, the ward lines she had fed with blood, and the wolves who now moved through the keep as one pack learning a better law. "Alive," she said first, fierce and soft at once. Then she smiled, tired and certain. "Beloved, ours." He kissed her marked shoulder, and the settled bond answered like a steady flame that would not go out.